Hey all you cats and kittens and all you non-binary fittens, it's your boy, DBiddles. Welcome back to Chatbots. Alright, so let's get this shindig dug. Here's how it goes. I build robot toys, I talk about robot shows, I talk about a bunch of stuff. I talk and I talk and I talk and I talk, and by the end, if I'm doing this whole talking thing right, I've actually said something worth saying. Hooray, I did it! High fives all around. So let's get going so I can get that high five and that "you did it, buddy" affirmation from all of the 4 people who listen to my videos. Hey, I couldn't do it without you guys. I love you all so much. Today, we have Dino-Mech-Gaiking, another one of those classic 70s super robots that came out in the wake of Mazinger Z. The story of Gaiking wasn't wholly unique by then contemporary standards. Humanity is threatened by an inhuman menace, and some scientist made a super robot named Gaiking to protect us, which can naturally only be piloted by a specific young person with psychic powers, rather than any old trained soldier. Gaiking's skull-shaped torso is actually the detachable head of a giant robot dragon known as the Daiku Maryu, hence the disproportionately large horns. And inside the belly of that giant dragon is a handful of dinosaur-themed specialty vehicles, which can deploy to assist Gaiking in battle. So far, nothing too extraordinary. What really set Gaiking apart from other mecha shows coming out at the time was the stakes at play that are motivating the villains to act. Whereas a lot of other mecha shows featured the bad guy's antagonism being the result of their ambitions for conquest and power, the Dark Horror Army from planet Zella is mostly only invading because their homeworld is threatened by a neighboring star having collapsed into forming a black hole. They've managed to hold on by migrating to subterranean caverns below the planet's surface, but it's only a matter of time before their world is torn apart. Fortunately, Zellan scientists discovered Earth several million years ago and left behind a bunker full of resources that they could use should they ever need to colonize the planet, hence why they're interested in Earth. But of course, we can't just have a bunch of desperate refugees fighting our hero, so there's evil Emperor Darius, who actually just wants to wipe out humanity rather than share the planet. And his 4 top generals are in charge of coming up with a slew of robots, monsters, and battleships to throw at humanity. Oh, and I guess I forgot to mention, the soldiers of Zella who make up the invasion force, yeah, they're actually brainwashed Zellan citizens who are forcefully conscripted into the Dark Horror Army and mutated into crazy avian super soldiers so that they can fulfill Darius's sinister plans for conquest rather than just ask for asylum. It's pretty clear that both cultures could really benefit from each other's influence and aid, maybe take life on Earth to the next level. Maybe the Zellans and the humans could be enriched by each other's cohabitation. But no. Fuck humanity. Darius wants it all for himself. Here again, I remind you of my Hygog video and encourage anyone who missed it to check it out for the history of the alien invader trope, along with a number of other handsomely discussed topics. Now, I hate to say it, but old Darius might be onto something. The people of Earth do seem to have a hard enough time getting along with their fellow man for incredibly arbitrary reasons. What chance do a bunch of non-Terrans have of living peacefully alongside a people who get irrationally mad at each other for having various levels of melanin? But maybe his reasoning is a little less cautious skepticism and a little more naked ambition. After all, being a scientifically advanced society, one which has already shown foresight in leaving a refuge on another planet, it's likely the Zellans foresaw this apocalyptic scenario and warned Darius of the impending doom, and he just chose to ignore it until it was too late. Good thing that never happens in real life. Oh wait! You know, if you're the type of guy who mind wipes his citizens to send them off into a senseless war on unfamiliar territory, and you keep sending your forces a little at a time to keep getting schooled by the enemy's clearly superior battlebot, you might actually be a largely inept, unpopular, and unscrupulous leader. You might even then take advantage of your citizens' desperation and ignorance of a foreign nation to instill fear in them of those foreigners, thereby fostering reliance on your leadership. Sorry guys, do you really want to overthrow your emperor and try to establish a constitutional democracy while we're facing extinction from a black hole, and there's also all these mean humans who want to exterminate you and your way of life? Yeah, didn't think so. And as the absolute authority over your entire race, you might recognize that cooperating with another society would necessitate ceding some or all authority to that foreign power. Maybe then the best way to make sure your power doesn't diminish during this time of uncertainty for your country would be hypermilitarism and xenophobia. If you could just wipe out or subjugate your enemies, you can then take over their resources and pacify your own population with a big victory and a cool new planet without having to give up power or having to meaningfully address their concerns about your governance. Maybe Darius's evil is a little more calculated and a little less cartoon supervillain than he lets on. Boy, that sounds like it might be relevant to our own world in a way that's not yet completely spelled out. I wonder if the rest of my video might have more to say on all that. But before getting too deep into that, let's just fire off a little disclaimer, kinda like the one I had in my Valkyrie video. In case my hands aren't tipping you off, I'm a light-skinned fella. I'm of the Caucasian persuasion. I'm not totally certain, but I think I have parts of me that are German, Polish, English, Swedish, and probably a little bit of Jewish. Though no one in my family, as far as I knew from my grandparents down, ever practiced Judaism. So basically, I'm 31 different flavors of vanilla. Though I guess we should factor in that South Africa is also the likely origin point for all of humankind. All of that is to say that, as Bill Murray puts it in the movie Stripes, I am a mutt. But I'm a mutt who is born with white skin, who has lived basically his entire life in predominantly white communities. So just know going into this that I'll be trying to address and comment on this broad and nuanced topic from the Wypipo, Mayo Monkey, privileged cracker perspective. So if I say anything insightful, hooray for the beige boy! But if I say anything insensitive or out of turn, my bad, I'm very sorry. So hey, xenophobia and racism? Pretty cringe, right? I mean, I'd hope that's a pretty self-explanatory statement, that racism is a completely paranoid and stupid and illogical and stupid and useless and evil and stupid and really fucking terrible mindset that has no place in our modern world, right? Like, I feel like most people would agree. I feel like most people can look at a person or people of different nationalities and backgrounds and ethnicities, and most of them don't immediately think, oh, I really dislike that person/people specifically for their race, and I just want to hate crime them so bad right now. And hey, our US Constitution has outlawed chattel slavery and made it illegal to discriminate based on race, creed, or ethnicity. We beat the Nazis back in World War II. We had Obama as a president, and now Kamala Harris as a vice president. George Floyd's killer went to jail, and Juneteenth is a federal holiday. So now, theoretically, racism is on its way out the door, right? We just have to wait for all the racist old people who are still alive, who were present during the civil rights movement, and were on the wrong side of history, to just die out, and then we'll be in the clear, right? Right? I mean, theoretically, sure, but let's just go ahead and take a look at some of the most open and active and outspoken racists who are out here in the streets doing racisms in recent headlines, and we'll see what we're up against. Let me just do some quick internet searching and Well, first on our list, Tommy Tuberville, 68, Senator of Alabama since 2020, and apologist for white nationalists. Alright, check. Old man, very short political career, might not get re-elected with every piece of coverage on him being overwhelmingly negative. Alright, Tucker Carlson, known for spreading all kinds of racist theories on his mega popular cable news program, and now doing so on Twitter because he doesn't have a mega popular cable news program. Alright, that's a problem, but, Tucker's 54 years old, and his show was primarily watched by senior citizens via cable. So, obviously, still pretty old people. let's see who else we got. Ron DeSantis, 44, governor of the state widely known for being populated by ultra-conservative retirees and wacky citizens who try to get married to alligators or whatever. Recently passed a bill requiring schools to teach both sides on the issue of slavery, and one of his staffers made a campaign promotion video featuring Nazi symbols. Yeesh. But he's absolutely going to get spanked by Donald Trump during their first debate in the primaries, and then hopefully his political career is just going to immediately crumple up like an evangelical pamphlet about Jesus being handed to me in the parking lot at work. Jason Aldean, 46, country music star who recently wrote a song thinly alluding to sundown towns that was #1 on iTunes for a little bit. Big yikes. Okay, Kanye West, also 46, but his music is really popular with the millennials who grew up with him, and also some Gen Z folk. That could be a problem. Kanye's neo-Nazi buddy, Milo Yiannopoulos, 38. 38, that's just a few years older than me. Banned from most social media, accused of pedophilia, and did volunteer intern work with Giga Karen and Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene. Hanging out with and possibly influencing current politicians? Eesh. Kanye's other neo-Nazi buddy, Nick Fuentes, 24. Jesus, 24? He's practically still a baby. And my notes have him starting his political commentary in 2017, so he would have been just about 18 or 19 at the time when he started firing off Nazi talking points and getting banned from all forms of social media, forming his own fan base known as the Groyper Movement, participating in January 6th, and rubbing elbows with the likes of Paul Gosar and the aforementioned Green and West. Man, he's a busy guy for someone so young. And Kanye, Milo, and Fuentes all got together to go meet with Donald Trump this past November in the middle of Ye's very public pro-Nazi episode to discuss a potential presidential run for Kanye, and Trump willingly heard them out. What else? Pearl Davis, aka Just Pearly Things. She's an Andrew Tate stan and anti-feminist YouTuber who wrote a song about Holocaust denial, which she dedicated to her friend Nick Fuentes, and then she went on Piers Morgan's TV show to talk about it. So, yeah, maybe the whole wait for the racist to die out idea isn't a totally sound strategy, huh? And hang on, let's look over this list again. Kanye West, pretty prominent and noteworthy black celebrity, hanging out with known Nazis, specifically because he likes that they are Nazis. And Nick Fuentes? By his own account, he is the descendant of Mexican immigrants, and yet he's very openly anti-immigrant. Sounds like someone's been hit by Zubat Supersonic because they just hurt themselves in their own confusion. See also 26-year-old unmarried female anti-feminist Pearl Davis, who claims that women lose value and appeal towards men after age 23. And these aren't even the only guys out there spreading the hate despite a seeming conflict of interest. Kanye's also good friends with political commentator Candace Owens, herself a black woman who seems to fully support Ye's anti-Semitic Black Hebrew Israelite messaging. And she made a whole documentary where she claims to have debunked the murder of George Floyd, a documentary which Kanye has been a very vocal advocate of. And she's recently been seen wearing a Jason Aldean t-shirt in support of the guy after backlash for his racist song. And then there's Candace's boss, Ben Shapiro, co-owner of the right-wing media outlet The Daily Wire, himself a Jew, who is only very lightly critical of Kanye's egregious anti-Semitism, but instead said that the real anti-Semites were anyone who criticized Israel before just kinda hand-waving away Ye's absolutely Zubat shit insane statements. Not to mention, Milo and Fuentes are both known homosexuals who are very outspoken against the queer community. Fuentes having live-streamed a date with a catboy, and Milo even claiming to be reformed from his deviant sexuality. That is, when Fuentes isn't pretending to be straight by saying he'd much rather marry a teenage girl over an adult woman so that they're still relatively young by the time he's 50. Just, Jesus fucking Christ, dude. And then also there's Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, also a black man, who voted in favor of revoking Roe v. Wade. His wife, Ginny Thomas, a white woman, was closely connected to the plot to instigate the January 6th riot. Clarence himself voted against affirmative action and student loan forgiveness, and he's been found to have a very close connection with wealthy real estate investor and prominent Republican donor, Harlan Crow, whom has lavished the Thomases with lots of expensive gifts for years now, all while Justice Thomas has been ruling on cases that might benefit Crow. Crow, incidentally, has an odd habit of collecting and displaying very valuable historical memorabilia, most particularly, you guessed it, Nazi memorabilia, and statues of prominent dictators. And of course, this is hardly a comprehensive list of all the active and prominent racists, or people who espouse racist talking points while themselves being members of oppressed racial and ethnic demographics. So it seems that not only is it a total non-option to just not be consciously racist and wait for deliberate racists to simply just go away, but it seems that taking it for granted that those affected by racism to always act in their own best interests is also unwise.
Excuse me, DBiddles, but aren't you falling prey to the racism of low expectations by assuming that these silly minorities just aren't capable of taking care of themselves and need you, the white savior, to point out how incorrect and stupid they are? You just activated my rhetorical trap card, you sorejack libcuck. Heh.
Oh no, you hypothetical cretin with the voice of Uncle Ruckus. It seems you've caught me unaware. It would be a shame for your masterful bad faith gambit if I just so happened to have a counter trap card in the form of a counter argument, which can be activated by sacrificing some of my life points. Some of my video time. Racism and being a racist is not exactly known for being associated with smart or logical thinking. Adolf Hitler himself hardly fell into his own Aryan Übermensch ideal, nor did Heinrich Himmler or Hermann Göring or Joseph Goebbels or Joseph Mengele or Rudolf Hess. They were skinny nerds, most of whom had brown hair and bad eyesight, except for Göring, who would have been considered fat in that time and reportedly had a bit of gender confusion, and some of them were part Jewish actually. I'm not belittling their ethnicities or their physicality by pointing out that they were being selfish dumbasses with monstrously bad ideas. They made exceptions for themselves because it was never really about being logically consistent. It was about accumulating power for themselves, not to do anything good for the Volk, the citizenry, but just to be in charge and make the rules. They were profoundly insecure, bitter, and weak men who sought to grab hold of things they couldn't control by means of pitting people against each other. They're like Gollum from Lord of the Rings. Miserable, wretched, paranoid, mentally ill, hateful, self-loathing, and willing to squander and sabotage any goodwill or pity thrown their way in pursuit of some power they're ill-equipped to handle and which shouldn't belong to any one person anyways. And since they didn't actually have any policies that would meaningfully improve people's lives, all they really did was prey on people's discontent and then use a convenient scapegoat demographic, one for which many people already had plenty of hateful or ignorant preconceptions, and then they blamed that demographic and their vague, general, open quotes, degeneracy for all their discontent. Oh, you're broke? Jews. Oh, your community has fallen into disrepair? Jews. Oh, you don't like this new social trend? Jewish degeneracy. The Nazi Party even tried to sweeten the deal by claiming that they would enact more socialist policies to better enrich the working-class German citizenry. Nazi was a nickname for the Nationalist Socialist movement. But they very quickly reneged on that after achieving power, because they only ever used false populism as a means of pitching authoritarianism. Any open socialists were rounded up with the Jews when the Nazis took power. But do you think that if, God forbid, the Nazis had stayed in power for far longer, if their expansionist ambitions for their Third Reich had been met, and if their genocidal campaign against all the Jews had been a success, do you think that that would have solved anything? And do you think that that would stop them from finding people to hate? Again, they didn't actually do much to improve the lives of their average citizens. They were just idiots, narcissists, and psychopaths. After a couple of decades of being ruled by these bumbling morons and having no Jews to blame their troubles on, don't you think eventually the Nazi citizens would have started looking at their leaders, these subpar Aryans, and then they'd think to themselves, you know, the Führer and his inner circle seem to have some of those inferior genes in them. Perhaps they cannot be trusted to rule properly. We should get some real Übermenschen in office. What about the Japanese, who were also part of the Axis powers? The same Japanese who Hitler had declared honorary Aryans because he so admired their more conservative and authoritarian government and their cultural hegemony. Do you really think that the peace could have lasted? Do you really think that the broadly xenophobic and imperially minded Japanese government wasn't also sharpening their knives for a time when they might turn on the Germans and Italians as well? And let's take it one step further. Say the Nazis successfully eliminated all of their former allies within their Axis, who fell short of the blonde hair, blue eyes, broad shoulders, able-bodied standard that they set for themselves. Again, they have no policy ideas. All they have is blaming other people for problems. How long before they started getting a little more insane, a little more fanatical, a little more arbitrary about their quote-unquote purity? A Nazi citizen who has too high of a BMI? That sounds like laziness and gluttony. Mustn't have such slovenly genes polluting the fatherland. An unmarried career woman? Cow, your place is in the home, siring the next generation of Übermenschen. Perhaps she is a degenerate with longings for other women. Or, how about the eugenicist's favorite, the highly limited and arbitrary IQ test? Young Johann is doing poorly in school, you say? Well, let us hope he can study harder and prove he is not some addled dullard whose inferiority must be culled. Do you think they'd have stood for people being unironically interested in arts and goods created by the inferior races? Or would that too have been a source of degeneracy? Matt Walsh, creepy ultra-conservative, child marriage enthusiast, and self-described theocratic fascist of the Daily Wire, when asked directly about his opinions on anime, stated, quote, "I think it's all satanic. I have no argument for it. I have no argument for why it's satanic. It just seems that way to me. All anime to me seems weird, just like bizarre, creepy, and in general, I don't think that adults should be, whether it's anime or any other kind of cartoon, with rare exception, adults really shouldn't be watching cartoons in general." And you know, he's got similarly poor opinions of video games. Look, dude, your fucking grandfather who shakes his head at the thought of you watching science fiction movies isn't gonna be swayed on this anime and video games thing. Do you really think that if you could just show a literal Nazi who makes policy decisions based on feels versus reals just the right kind of foreign cartoon, that they'll actually come around and say, yeah, no, actually, we're okay with this thing because Attack on Titan is just so, yeah, war? Or are they going to take one look at your Astolfo body pillow and send you straight to the camps? Do not pass laws. Do not collect 200 Reichsmarks. I know which one Moms for Liberty, aka the Nazi mom group, chose. See my second episode of the Brick Edition for that one. Or hey, maybe they'll start combing through family genetic history, searching for any trace of non-Aryan heritage. Maybe the reason you're not fulfilling the ideal role of a German citizen is because of long dormant genes from your whore great-grandmother and her degenerate race traitor of a husband. I mean, I myself am a pretty Caucasian-looking fellow, but again, have a teeny tiny bit of Jewish ancestry and a bit of Polish ancestry. I have brown hair and brown eyes. How much of that would be considered too much? First they came for the brown people, the Muslims, the Latinos, the queer folks, and I was not one of them, etc., etc. Nazis always think that they'll be safe, that they're one of the good ones, that their dedication to the cause of hatred will earn them forgiveness for their particular flavor of degeneracy, but it won't. Bigotry is an Ouroboros, a serpent that consumes its own tail, and the best way to keep those of us who are part of the midsection of the serpent safe is to keep the head from even nibbling on the tail. Here I spy another opportunity to cite back to points I made in my Gundam Aerial video. Injustices to one are injustices to all, because you could be the next one on the injustice chopping block. I'm not being anti-white people by advocating on behalf of minorities. I'm a white person. If anything, I'm being self-interested by pointing out that racism is alive and well.
Okay, but there's no real threat from the Nazis anymore, DBiddles. That's just a bunch of hyperbolic misinfo from the liberal media. The North beat the South in the American Civil War, thereby ending slavery, and that crazy, radical leftist president, Joseph Robinette Biden, is letting so many people through our southern border that it must make a libtard like yourself absolutely giddy. Racism is over. You and Colin Kaepernick are just being crybaby snowflake SJWs who are blaming everybody else for your problems.
Whoa, 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 whoa. My guy, easy does it. I can only address one incorrect statement at a time, so let's address those points in an order that will make more sense at the end of this. So let's start with Abraham Lincoln, usually considered a pretty rad president in terms of social justice. He freed the slaves with the 13th Amendment after all, right? And he would have gone on to do great things post-Civil War to better reconstruct the Union had he not been assassinated. That's why he's got all those monuments commemorating him. What's this? Oh! Excuse me, folks, it seems I've just been handed this note from my non-existent editor. It's an August 1858 campaign quote from Lincoln during his race for a U.S. Senate seat for Illinois against opponent Stephen Douglas. It reads,
"If all earthly power were given to me, my first impulse would be to free all the slaves and send them to Liberia, to their own native land. But a moment's reflection would convince me that whatever of high hope, as I think there might be in this, in the long run, its sudden execution is impossible."
Just wanted to send them all away, even though any slaves at that point probably had no connection to the land their grandfathers were taken from? That doesn't seem like the chillest solution. And look, here's another quote from September of that same year.
"I will say then that I am not, nor ever have been, in favor of bringing about in any way the social and political equality of the white and black races. That I am not, nor ever have been, in favor of making voters or jurors of Negroes, nor of qualifying them to hold office, nor to intermarry with white people. And I will say, in addition to this, that there is a physical difference between the white and black races, which I believe will forever forbid the two races living together on terms of social and political equality. And inasmuch as they cannot so live, while they do remain together, there must be the position of superior and inferior. And I, as much as any other man, am in favor of having the superior position assigned to the white race."
And in a 1962 address to some black men he invited to the White House.
"You and we are different races. We have between us a broader difference than exists between almost any other two races. Whether it is right or wrong I need not discuss, but this physical difference is a great disadvantage to us both, as I think your race suffer very greatly, many of them by living among us, while ours suffer from your presence. In a word, we suffer on each side."
And here's a teeny little bit from abolitionist Frederick Douglass, no relation to Stephen, who regarded Lincoln as being guilty of, quote, the prejudices of his white fellow countrymen against the Negro. I'll link a Wikipedia article in the description, but Lincoln was apparently most strongly opposed to slavery, but was less committed to equality and suffrage for his black citizens after slavery was abolished, which admittedly probably wasn't uncommon for most white folks in his time, even those who were against slavery. His thinking may have evolved over the 7 years between those initial campaign remarks and his assassination, but he wasn't exactly what you might call an especially enlightened individual. Almost sounds like separate but equal, the motto of the Jim Crow South. And hey, let's look at that 13th Amendment he ratified. It reads exactly as follows. Section 1. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. Section 2. Congress shall have power to enforce this article by appropriate legislation. Well, that all seems straightforward enough. Wait, hold the phone. Except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted. So wait, is this saying that slavery is legal actually if you're a convicted criminal? You know, now that you mention it, I do recall seeing like prison inmates on like TV and movies and shit doing all kinds of hard labor, which I can't imagine they get paid particularly well for. And wait, aren't civil rights activists always talking about the disproportionate criminalization of black citizens? And they also mentioned something about the US police system having origins tied to the slave patrols who would round up runaway slaves. You know, that seems a little suspicious. You know, we have all these vaguely racialized terms like thug and gangsta and welfare queen and terrorists and illegal aliens, but we all know that they're just thinly veiled phrases for people of color so that the talking heads on cable TV can talk about certain demographics without saying the quiet part out loud. Isn't it interesting how when a bunch of rowdy, drunken, mostly white football or hockey fans have a riot after a big win, that it just gets dismissed as boys being boys, but when mostly peaceful protesters take to the streets to speak out against police killing another unarmed person of color, cable news calls them violent anarchists while cops in full riot gear throw tear gas at them. What are these for-profit prisons I'm hearing about? What are mandatory minimum sentencing laws? And when will I get around to making a Pat Labor video to discuss some of these things in greater detail? You know, post-Civil War, it's not like those freed slaves were left all that financially secure. And while former plantation owners would have been mighty sore at seeing all their former property walking around their communities as free men, they surely would have had a lot of generational wealth from exploiting those former slaves that they could use to keep living comfortably, albeit less so than they were when they were slave owners. You know, generational wealth that they could pass on to the next generation of family members who might also benefit from it. Might then some of the local government officials, many of whom would have been former Confederate officials, might they then write some weird laws that get enforced arbitrarily that could feature penalties in the form of fines which a poor former slave might be unable to pay, and therefore then end up in prison for? That seems vaguely possible, right? If the punishment for a crime is monetary in nature, or if the crime is connected to wealth, and there's a huge obvious wealth disparity that just so happens to exist between races, then you don't need to write anything about race into your legislation to do harm to a racial demographic. And truth is, most quote-unquote crime is committed by the economically disadvantaged, the poor. If stealing's a crime and you don't have the money to meet your living needs, what are you gonna do? If homelessness and loitering and squatting is a crime and you need money for rent or a mortgage, what are you gonna do? If the sale and possession of certain substances that desperate people might use as an escape from their harsh condition is criminalized, what are you gonna do? Plus, if you're a wealthy person whose wealth is built off the hard work of others and maximizing profit margins by paying as little to produce that wealth as possible, even if you can't go full slavery, you can get pretty close by paying as low of a minimum wage as possible, right? And maybe you can funnel people into low-wage careers by underfunding certain educational districts. Big corporations are owned by very wealthy people, typically someone who started wealthy enough to provide a wider variety of goods and services at lower prices than most mom and pops. Nobody dreams of working at Dollar General, but if they can't afford to go to college, if they weren't able to get a good education due to budget cuts, well, they need to make money somehow. Hell, forget working at Dollar General. Nobody dreams of shopping at Dollar General. But if all you have is a minimum wage income due to never having pursued higher education and you have a family to take care of, you're not exactly able to shop at Whole Foods. And if you're just scraping by, what are you going to do when something unforeseen comes down the pipe? Some big medical bill or car payment or house fire? Suddenly, dealing and being in a gang is an option you can't afford to totally ignore. Suddenly, unpaid prison labor is a slightly closer reality. At this point, I'm sure any shitbags listening to me talk are jumping up out of their seat, shouting,
$13.50, $13.50, $13.50.
And if you're a normal, sane person who has better things to do with their life than obsessively hate certain people, those numbers probably don't mean anything to you. So allow me to clarify and then rebut. 1350 is in reference to a statistic that approximately 13% of the United States population is black, but that the black community, specifically black men, are responsible for roughly 50% of murders in the United States. And cockweasels like to use this little factoid as proof that black men are inherently violent and malicious. But this statistic comes from the FBI's Uniform Crime Reporting System, and the number refers to arrest rates, not conviction rates. Though sometimes they like to pull the number 1390 out of their asses too, as if somehow 1/8 of the national population can somehow manage to kill 9 people for every 1 person killed by the other 7/8 of potential murderers out there. And while again, I might point to economic desperation and a lack of generational wealth as correlative to much of crime or proximity to crime, or that it could be a factor in police profiling leading to disproportionate arrests, I'm also now thinking back to my Valkyrie video where I had some statistics of my own. Let's go over them, shall we? Findings from 2019 show that despite men making up 49% of the population, men account for 84% of all violent crimes, 98% of all sexual offenses, 93% of all weapon possession, 92% of all robberies, and 86% of all criminal damage and arson. 85% of victims of domestic violence are women, and 25 to 40% of families of police officers are subject to domestic abuse, and roughly 1/3 of all active service members or combat veterans with PTSD are reported to have been physically aggressive with their female partners, and 98% of public shootings are attributable to cis men. So if we're going to start using disproportionate statistics to start demonizing black people, seems to me there's a whole other demographic that represents a far more disproportionate threat than just 50%. But like I alluded to again in the Valkyrie video, racists only think it's violent savagery when it's non-white people doing the violence, and at all other times it's indicative of the noble warrior tradition of conventional masculinity. When white people kill, they're like Beowulf or St. George or John Wayne. They're square-jawed noble heroes who protect their blood and soil. When people of color kill, they're some kind of plague of evil, hyper-violent monster men whose existence cannot be tolerated. And I'm sure there's some other pseudo-intellectual with a red cap out there in the back row just straining his raised hand, waiting for me to call on him so he can blurt out,
"What about black-on-black crime?"
So, okay, I'll bite. What about it? You care about black-on-black crime. What about white-on-white crime? White people being the majority demographic of the US, there's gonna be more economically disenfranchised white folks out there committing dipshit crimes. Doing drugs, abusing their family members, shooting up their workplaces, ineptly trying to shoplift Magic the Gathering cards from Walmart, etc. You want to start getting tough on those guys? Or does the TV news always seem to bring up a family member or neighbor whenever some disturbed, violent, antisocial white person shoots up a bunch of people so that that person can talk about their loved one's mental illness?
Well, rich people commit crimes too, DBiddles.
They certainly do. They're just different kinds, usually. And let's face it, they rarely, if ever, face consequences for them. We all know that there's a two-class justice system in this country, and that the difference between those classes is who has lots of money and who doesn't. There's all kinds of shitty things that the wealthy and powerful do every day that you or I would get our ring pieces turned inside out over. Insider trading, sexual extortion, pollution, violating labor laws, wage theft, torturing prisoners, starting unjustified wars in the Middle East under false pretenses, unsecured handling of top-secret documents, etc. In the rare instances where a rich person does face justice, it's either because they're fucking over other rich people, or it's only after years and years and years of egregious behavior. And even then, it's only after even more time has passed with their expensive lawyers pulling out every scummy legal delaying tactic in the book to make sure either the defendant or the claimant dies of old age before going to trial. I mean, we still haven't even bothered to investigate Epstein's little black book of wealthy and influential clientele. But if someone tries to sell PlayStations that they stole from Walmart, or tries to sleep on a park bench in the nice side of town, or tries to park their car in the wrong spot, you better believe Johnny Law is going to be there with your right to a speedy trial. We never bother to talk about white-on-white crime because it's inconvenient for the narrative. Hey, I've had a lot of quotes so far, so let's get some more. Let's just jump ahead to the late 1960s, no particular reason, and let's look in on this guy called John Ehrlichman, who was counsel and former assistant to President Richard Nixon. And his quote I will read in my Skeletor impression.
The Nixon campaign in 1968 and the Nixon White House after that had two enemies, the anti-war left and black people. You understand what I'm saying? We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or black, but by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did. I'll get you next time, He-Man!
Except for that last part about He-Man added for my own amusement, this is a real quote from an interview with journalist Dan Baum from 1994 that was conducted on behalf of Baum's 1996 book about the war on drugs. Baum would, for one reason or another, not publish this quote until 2016, in an article for Harper's Magazine. It sounds like the sort of insane shit that a cartoon supervillain would say, and yet it was said by a really real person connected to the Nixon administration. His surviving family has since come out and debated the veracity of this quote, but hey, wouldn't you if your dad was apparently in league with Lord Hordak?
Okay, well, the drugs and the cartels from Mexico, and all these immigrants taking our jobs and seducing our women.
Hey, let me ask you something. Why is it only ever certain immigrants that conservatives fear? You don't hear much kerfuffle about Canadian immigrants or European immigrants or Nordic immigrants. No, those ones are good apparently. They're considered an acceptable part of the great melting pot. No good old boys ever get bent out of shape when Jean-Claude from Quebec moves in across the street. But at different times throughout history, Chinese immigrants, or Mexican immigrants, or Japanese immigrants, or Italian immigrants, or African immigrants, or Polish immigrants, or Cuban refugees, or Afghan refugees, or Syrian refugees, or Irish refugees were all just some great big concern.
Wait, Italians and Irish and Polish? But those guys are all white.
Oh, they are now. But in times not too long past, they were considered non-white peoples. They were considered inferior races to the nebulous concept of whiteness. Whiteness is actually pretty arbitrary. If you ask people native to Mexico and Spain and various South American countries, they don't really consider themselves as non-white. And Italians and Irish and Polish folks got brought into the broader definition of Wypipo when the focus of disdain in America shifted to other ethnicities. Or at other times in US history, we operated by the one-drop principle, where if you had one drop of a white person's blood in you, usually as a result of slave owners sexually assaulting slaves, you were considered a white person. You know, just assuming people didn't make uncharitable assumptions about you anyways based on your skin color. But let's just narrow our focus for now to Mexican immigrants. As I said in my recent Brick Edition video, episode 3, Biden hasn't actually meaningfully altered the immigration policy for the US southern border. But regardless of whether or not you believe that, tell me this. If you were hypothetically a Mexican person who knew about the US, who knew that in the US there's more guns than people, and that the people who own the most guns in the US were absolutely bug-fuck nuts, and that they hated people like you who came into their country, if you knew that their police all carry guns, and that they have special police who sit on the border between our countries, day drinking and polishing their rifles, if you knew that even if you were taken alive, you might end up in some kind of fucking state-sponsored Obama-built Trump and Biden-supported concentration camp entirely separate from the other state-sponsored concentration camp where they fully intend to keep your children separated from you, if you knew all that, but you still came to the US because things are apparently so fucking dire in Mexico that you're willing to risk it, are you really going to be eager to do a lot of crimes, knowing that you just being there is already a crime? Or are you going to keep your head low and try to just get by unnoticed? Just going to work hard and be polite and order McDonald's by pointing at the picture menu and try to keep to yourself and not draw attention to yourself? Just gonna get some job doing landscaping or house cleaning or handyman work for some rich guy who pays you under the table so you don't have to worry about paperwork and he doesn't have to worry about minimum wage or benefits? Just gonna get some low-skill retail or service job, hoping that they forget about your work visa expiring in a few months? They're not taking the high-paying jobs, dipshit. If they can manage to be a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer in their home country, they can probably afford a plane ticket and can pass a citizenship test. The illegal immigrants are taking the jobs that are in low demand and have high turnover. They're taking the goon jobs, the everyman jobs. So either your job is not in danger, or your job is only in danger because that particular business really wanted to underpay you and you weren't willing to accept that, meaning it would have been a job working for a scumbag. What do you care if the Mexicans take those jobs? If anything, those Mexicans deserve to be paid even better due to their work ethic. First and second generation immigrants can't afford to be criminals. It's not until you get to their grandkids, aka natural-born Americans, where you're going to see the crime rate move up. And then they're not criminal immigrants. They're criminals who are lower-class American citizens. Lower-class American citizens just perfect to be fed into our carceral system of prison slave labor. Personally, I love immigrants, or at least I love the idea of them. Like I said, I live in a predominantly white community, but that doesn't mean that there aren't plenty of non-white folks I see around town. Plenty of people for whom it's clear that English is a second language who are working, commuting, shopping, living, going to school, and opening businesses within spitting distance of my house. It'd be unfair of me to assume that they're all, or mostly all, here illegally. But hypothetically, what if they were? What if they were breaking some stupid bureaucratic rule to be here? What the fuck do I care if they can't name all 50 states and their capitals? Most of the white people I know can't do that. Quick, without looking, what's the capital of Vermont? It's Montpelier. thank you Animaniacs and your catchy songs. Most of the white people that I know are far ruder, stupider, and more annoying than the non-white people I know. If I were to exhaustively go through every person that I knew and rate them on how much of an asshole they were, and then were to get percentages of how many of them were assholes based on race or ethnicity, I'd probably get roughly the same ratio for white and non-white asshole people. But that means I'd know way more white people who are assholes than I do non-white people. And those white asshole people are probably bigger assholes because I know a lot of them more intimately, and they have that entitledness to them where they aren't constantly on guard for fear of being unfairly demonized for their skin color. That, and I hear lots of news stories of mostly white people doing the most insane shit imaginable. Shout out again to Ron DeSantis land. So, by that reasoning, I'd actually be more justified in having a prejudicial view of white people. I don't, actually. I don't lock my car doors or walk on the other side of the street when I see white people coming, but I feel like I just made a sound case for fearing and distrusting them if I wanted to generalize a whole demographic. But returning to the topic of immigrants, leaving the whole asshole factor aside, I like the unique things that all these folks bring to our country. The melting pot means we as Americans get treated to all kinds of cool things brought to us from people of all different backgrounds. Music, art, culture, clothing, food, so much stuff in our world that we take for granted that is the product of non-white people or non-Americans. And I like when those things get added to the community that I'm part of. What kind of music would we have without black people paving the way with gospel, soul, jazz, blues, R&B, rock and roll, punk rock, heavy metal, country, hip-hop, dubstep, techno, and pop? Just about every type of music we listen to these days was invented by or strongly influenced by black artists. What kind of theater and cinema would there be without the work and influence of Jewish folks who were some of the core pioneers in those fields? Much of our railroads were built by Chinese immigrants, and so much of the products we enjoy are thanks to the work of Chinese citizens, though obviously much of that labor is exploited, but stick with me here. Indian folks bring us fashion and Bollywood and the Kama Sutra. Latino folks have all kinds of alternative artwork and music. I know that at least a few of you have to be into K-pop or K-dramas. Just about every nationality has some cool food to try, and I feel like there's one really big, obvious example of imported culture that I'm overlooking that has brought a lot of influence to our popular cultural landscape, but for some reason it's not coming to mind. Some kind of other Asian influence. Thailand maybe? No. It'll come to me. And who knows what other cool stuff we might never get to experience if we keep them from bringing it to us. If anything, we should be opening our borders, not closing them. We should be making it easier for people to come here, not making it harder. I love that immigrants are here, bringing their cool stuff to show us and opening restaurants where every order comes with a plate of equal size to the entree that has nothing but beans and rice on it. Not that I don't want other countries to thrive and prosper, but I like having these people who bring different contributions to our country that we wouldn't get with just a bunch of whiteys running around. And you can feel free to miss me with all that stuff is degenerate though mentality. Imagine thinking that only the art and culture made by white people is any good. Imagine trying to subsist off of only grandpa music, classical architecture, and greasy, unseasoned food. Basically, imagine trying to be the stuffy old academy dean in every 80s college-based comedy flick. What a boring-ass life you would lead if all you had was Shakespeare, Beethoven, and beans on toast.
DBiddles, I know and agree with you on all this stuff. I'm not the guy bringing up these talking points that you've argued against. I'm a nice person who judges based on the content of one's character rather than the color of their skin. And I don't really understand why you spent this much time talking about this stuff. Like you said, we have ethnic history months for every major non-white demographic in the US. Surely progress is being made and we can stop debating racial issues now. You're just dividing people with this talk of racism.
I mean, can we stop debating though? Surely I've pointed out a few good reasons throughout this that indicate that while progress is being made, we still have a long way to go. And just because the US has passed lots of anti-discrimination laws and regulations, they can still find ways to legally discriminate based on race or ethnicity, or they can find ways to justify their hatred of specific groups. And the US can and has done so in the past. There's a million examples I could pluck out of our history from our inception into today that would demonstrate that. From the Trail of Tears, to redlining and white flight, to limiting immigration from specific countries, to police profiling, to drone strikes, to the Tulsa Massacre, to smallpox blankets, to the Tuskegee syphilis study, to reservations for indigenous people, to ICE facilities, to the War on Terror, to years spent ignoring the AIDS crisis, to the Chinese Exclusion Act, to just about everything ever done by the CIA. This shit doesn't go away just because they try to sweep it under the rug or because you never bothered to pay attention. It's still a very real and present force in today's world. Yes, the US helped beat the Nazis in World War II, but you want to know the ugly, forgotten truth? The US didn't really want to get involved initially, because there was a substantial amount of US citizens who agreed with Hitler's anti-Semitic policies and liked him. Starting a war with Hitler would have been very politically unpopular, assuming the people in charge even wanted to that badly. Hell, Hitler got a lot of his eugenics ideas and policy ideas from the US. He liked how we came up with all these laws to make it totally legal for the government to undercut any attempts for minorities to make any kind of headway, and he liked how a lot of our government-sponsored scientists were trying to selectively breed away undesirables. He liked the slogan US-based Nazi sympathizers came up with, America First. Hey, I've heard that before, though I can't place my finger on where precisely. And you know, the US only entered the war after Pearl Harbor, after the Japanese got us directly involved in the fighting. And at that point, we focused our war efforts pretty heavily on the Pacific Front, on Japan. We came up with internment policies for Japanese American citizens, and you know, whatever other Asian citizens we mistook for being Japanese. We didn't do that to German American citizens or Italian American citizens. And at the Nuremberg trials, a lot of Nazis got punished, but some individuals here and there slipped through, and some scientists got some sweetheart plea bargains that allowed them to avoid punishment if they started doing science on behalf of the US government. The second set of Nuremberg military tribunals saw 3,887 cases brought up, with all but 489 of them dropped. Close to 1,700 defendants were involved, with only 279 of the defendants given life sentences, and less than 200 of them were given the death penalty. That's a whole lot of Nazis going free. I feel like you shouldn't be counting released Nazi soldiers in the hundreds. And by the 1950s, almost all of those 279 individuals serving life sentences had been released, and most of the longer sentences from the approximately 1,400 others were drastically reduced, many of them serving less jail time than the entirety of the 4 years of Japanese internment. The neo-Nazis are coming from inside the house, my friends. Got another quote for you, this one coming to us from Lee Atwater, a political strategist and presidential advisor to both Ronald Reagan and George Bush Sr. These comments were made in a 1981 interview with political scientist Alexander P. Lamis. The audio for this exchange was made publicly available in 2012, but I'll be presenting some key points from the interview here again with the voice of Skeletor being used in place of Atwater, and my normal voice for the interviewer.
As to the whole Southern strategy that Harry S. Dent Sr. and others put together in 1968, opposition to the Voting Rights Act would have been a central part of keeping the South. Now you don't have to do that. All that you need to do to keep the South is for Reagan to run in place on the issues that he's campaigned on since 1964, and that's fiscal conservatism, balancing the budget, cut taxes, you know, the whole cluster.
But the fact is, isn't it, that Reagan does get to the Wallace voter and to the racist side of the Wallace voter by doing away with legal services, by cutting down on food stamps.
Y'all don't quote me on this. You start out in 1954 by saying N-word, N-word, N-word. By 1968, you can't say N-word. That hurts you. Backfires. So you say stuff like forced busing, states' rights, and all that stuff. You're getting so abstract now that you're talking about cutting taxes, and all these things you're talking about are totally economic things, and a byproduct of them is that blacks get hurt worse than whites. And subconsciously, maybe that is part of it. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that if it is getting that abstract and that coded, that we are doing away with the racial problem one way or the other. You follow me? Because obviously sitting around saying, we want to cut this is much more abstract than even the busing thing. And hell, a lot more abstract than N-word, N-word. So any way you look at it, race is coming on the back burner.
Huh. I just noticed that Skeletor kinda sounds like a slightly less nasally Waluigi. Anyways, does that sound like something that might still be happening today? The target shifts and slides. Sometimes it's Mexicans, sometimes it's Muslims. Mostly right now it's trans folks and the broader LGBT community. But it's always something to keep people divided. And it's done in subtle ways, so that the average person doesn't realize how much they're being made to keep blaming some other group for their problems, rather than turning their attention to the politicians and the ultra-wealthy and the policies they enact that hurt most people directly. States' rights, free and fair elections, welfare. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain.
Say, DBiddles, wouldn't cutting food stamps also hurt lots of white people too? And come to think of it, doesn't a lot of what you're talking about also happen to white people? You know, unpaid prison labor, underfunded schools, etc.
Very clever, viewer. I hadn't thought about that before you came to that conclusion all on your own, but yes, I suppose much of this would affect lots of lower-class white folks as well, predominantly those we associate with the term white trash, but also many working-class families as well. And come to think of it, wouldn't the concept of white trash fit quite nicely into the theory of Aryan supremacy as well? After all, only the truest and best Aryans, only the most masterful of the master race, would be naturally inclined to dominating their peers. Hell, if a person of a lower race, if a black person or a Polish person or a Jewish person or a Japanese person is successful in standing head and shoulders above a white person despite their handicaps, might they then be entitled to being an honorary Aryan as well? At least for a time they might be. Hell, maybe they could be Chancellor of Germany. It really isn't all that much about race so much as it is power and wealth, huh? After all, not having a bunch of quote-unquote Untermenschen to scapegoat or exploit labor from, it sure would make things a lot less easy for these otherwise largely unremarkable folks who rely on these systems. Maybe it's not so much about exterminating lower races as it is about subjugating them and justifying that subjugation. Hey, why am I now suddenly thinking back to the Astro Boy segment in my Hygog video? I'm not blaming all white people for the crimes of some white people. Just in case you forgot, I'm a white person. I'm just trying to point out that there are systems in play that benefit some people over others. Unjust things that my fellow vanilla gorillas might take for granted or not be aware of that makes life difficult for our non-white comrades. That's what white privilege is. It's the luxury of being ignorant to all these factors that work against certain demographics because they don't affect us as strongly. If anything, I thought the facts don't care about your feelings crowd, the people who call other people snowflakes, were super into this cold, hard, logical truth shit. This "you're not special, you're just spoiled and entitled" shit is usually their favorite thing. There's so much more to this issue than I can cover in this already overly long video, and only so much that I, with my limited perspective, even know about. And I'm not suggesting that we as white people will be able to fix it for people of color, but that we should be aware of these difficulties and should be ready, willing, and able to lend our understanding and support when they call on it. And we should be conscious of the effects of policies that we might advocate for that have strong negative consequences for certain demographics deliberately built into them. We can't afford to just assume that this tolerance thing is a done deal, because it's not. And there's a lot of elements to it that we're not even aware of to address. By disadvantaging some of us, we are threatening the well-being of all of us. You know, I don't know if any black holes are going to be showing up next to Earth anytime soon, but I do know that climate change is currently a problem, and that one of the fun features of that is the melting of the polar ice caps and the raising of the oceans. And looking at global elevation maps, a lot of people might end up having to move to other countries because their homes will be imperiled by this. How much you want to bet this starts getting framed as some kind of racial problem or immigrant problem rather than a corporate greed and pollution problem? It's not enough to simply be not racist. We must instead be actively anti-racist. One last quote for the road. This one comes from Malcolm X. No Skeletor voice for him, obviously. If you stick a knife 9 inches into my back and pull it out 3 inches, that is not progress. Even if you pull it all the way out, that is not progress. Progress is healing the wound, and America hasn't even begun to pull out the knife. Regardless of whether or not you want to believe in climate change or global catastrophe, we're all going to need each other for the challenges that humanity faces, and so we best get started on making things right for everyone. Because by coming together, maybe we won't need to rely on non-existent super robots to thwart our very real evil emperors for us. Whew! Another long one with a short build. Hey, thanks for listening, folks. Hope my extremely unfocused thoughts on extremely broad and nuanced topics gave you something to think about. If you liked it, you could give it a thumbs up, you could subscribe to my channel, you could ring the bell to make sure you see the next one, you can watch a few more of my videos, you can tell me what you think in the comments below, and best of all, you can share it with a friend. Hey, next episode I'll do a different robot with a different story and a different topic. Maybe, this one? He looks pretty cool. I'm DBiddles, this is ChatBots, and until next time, sayonara bye-bye.